Welcome back, everybody, to Porn Free Millennial. I'm your host, Mac, and today we're going to be diving into a topic that affects many: overcoming temptation and breaking free from the cycle of porn use. I'm going to be sharing a simple yet effective 3-step process that I've developed called the 3 whats. This is how it goes: then what, so what, and now what. The 3 whats. But before we jump into those steps, I did want to share a bit about my own journey. Recently, I've been facing a lot of work, a lot of stress, just a lot of thoughts of uncertainty, and I think I've told everyone before, I went through a divorce about 2 years ago, and just trying to settle and sort out my life has brought a lot of different stresses and just things that maybe you don't expect, or things that you do expect, but when they hit you, either emotionally or just in reality, you just kind of find yourself a little bit stuck, and it can add up with anxiety, add up with stress. So basically everything was piling up. I feel like it got to kind of a boiling point where I found myself really struggling more than usual with temptation. And I had a few tough days. Where definitely, if I was looking at like a stop light with green, yellow, and red, those representing sobriety, with like green being great, yellow being in the middle, like edging, unhealthy, starting to have unhealthy behavior, and then red being your red line, losing your sobriety. I had a few days when I was in the yellow recently, and those are really tough days. But I did lean into the techniques I'm going to discuss today. They really helped me stay on track with my sobriety, and I am excited to share them with you. So we'll go ahead and jump in now. So the first step is called then what. So this step focuses on awareness. It's really important to ask yourself when you're feeling these temptations, is what's the end point if I keep giving in to these tempting thoughts? So for an example, when I felt the urge to slip back into the old habits, I took a moment to really visualize what the consequences would be if I kept going down this path. And I'm sure if you're listening, you're someone that struggles with this, like I do, to where you start to get this temptation to maybe look at something, like pull something up on your phone, your laptop, and maybe linger a little bit on an image or a video that you see online, or even a person that's like attractive, that you find attractive, that you see. You find yourself just lingering more in that area than otherwise you were before, to where you were in a healthy mindset, you weren't sexualizing or giving into these temptations. We find ourselves at times having that urge to slip back. And I think when you go back and you ask yourself, well, then what? What if I keep having this fantasy in my head, or I keep breathing life into this? What happens if I give in? And what it helped me realize was, I might have this initial relief if I give in. If I pull up porn and I look at it, I might have this initial relief, but also a part of that visualization is understanding that I'm going to have guilt, I'm going to have shame, I'm going to have isolation, I'm going to damage the trust that I've been building, with my partner. And as you visualize these things, and as I visualize these things, it really helped me see the whole picture of, if I keep going, this is how it's going to turn out. Like I've already been down this road. Like I've talked in my podcast before, definitely like my relationship with porn was a big part of my divorce, and the breaking down of what was a good relationship with somebody was definitely my relationship with porn, and how that shaped my actions and shaped just how I went about life. So really, I want to challenge you on this first step of then what, is to focus on the awareness and think ahead a little bit. Think about maybe past times where you've relapsed in porn, and like how that whole process went. I'm gonna bet that that process probably didn't go well at the end, right? Like it probably led to uh, some pretty tough conversations, not feeling great inside. I know when I was struggling recently, I already started to feel inside that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I need to check this in. I need to check this in with my accountability partner. I need to check this in with my girlfriend. I need to talk about it because if I just hold this uh, and I don't do something about it, I already know what's going to happen. If we go to the very end, it's not going to go well. So really think about how one small choice can lead to a chain reaction. Maybe this small moment starts with escape, but soon you could find yourself spiraling back into a cycle that you've worked really hard to break. And that's an important thing to call out too, is that you've done a lot of work. Like you're working on getting this negative entity, this negative relationship out of your life. Like if you're listening to this, you understand that there is something that is not serving you going on. And you are taking steps to break that relationship. And you've worked really hard at it. It's not an easy thing. Like breaking free of porn is really hard. It's not easy. It's not like we just make a decision one day and it's done. Uh, Typically, it's something that's programmed into us at a very early age. And when you look at society now or social media, everything in some angle has been sexualized beyond the point it was, 5 to 10 years ago, where it's just in your face with temptations everywhere, right? So just realize, like think about all the hard work you've been putting in. And, we're always going to make mistakes. But if you can think ahead and you can visualize it, that gives you a better chance to make a good decision and to choose to stay on the road of recovery versus slipping off of it and going in the ditch. So when you think about this, when you think about then what, and you think about how you could be spiraling back into the cycle, this reflection can create that sense of urgency to confront that temptation head on. So, what I would say is when you feel that urge, when you feel that temptation to go back into bad habits, just take a deep breath and ask yourself, what am I really looking for? Is it comfort? Is it escape? Is it connection? And just understand, like, what is that motivation? Like, what is that motivation there? And I think once you realize and you think deeply and you have that awareness of what you're actually looking for, it can be really empowering. I think for me, typically, I get those temptations, and when they recently happened to me, I think I was just looking for some like relief almost, just feeling like I put too much on my plate and I'm just looking for relief. I'm like looking for this break. But when you think about it fully, it would just be, I'm just making matters worse. Like I'm actually adding more to my plate. It's just a very momentary feeling of relief that I would feel, but it's not actually the solution that I'm looking for. So realizing that, hey, I need some relief, that's actually allowed me to put more healthy uh, activities in my life that have actually provided me relief, that have really helped snap that cycle of almost slipping back into those bad habits, if that makes sense. So, I think just like before we move on to the next section, just pause for a second to reflect, take a moment, think about the last time you felt tempted. And, like what was going on in your life? And if you did give into that temptation, how did that choice impact you afterward? Was that like a net positive, net negative? Because if you made the right choice, right, and you decided not to give into that temptation, think about that for a second. Think about the wins that you've had. Think about the times where you were tempted and you chose not to give into it. And then compare that with the times that you did give into the temptation. How did you feel? How did that affect potentially your relationship, right, with your wife, your girlfriend, or your relationship with God? Think about that deeply, right? And I would just say for me, I'm very grateful to my past self and that I put in the work to get out of that situation, because I felt like that next that next encounter, that next time I was with my girlfriend, it would have went a way different way if I decided to give in fully to the temptation and not to talk about it, and to kind of go into the bad habits that I've had before, which I think I've shared on this podcast, of just when I was really in my bad habits, it'd be like performing the act of watching porn and then not telling the truth about it initially, and then typically that coming out, like the truth coming out through discovery, where my partner was discovering it, or really just saying, hey, like, I don't think you're being honest with me. And if you've ever been there before, it's just really a terrible place to be. It puts your partner in a really bad place, and then for you, it puts like your integrity in jeopardy, because like you're kind of breaking, you're not kind of, you are breaking this covenant you're making with yourself, to where you're saying, hey, I want to break free from this. I don't want this to be a part of my life, and then we end up doing it. And then if we end up lying about it, it just makes it that much more worse. So before we move on to the next step, right, just take a moment, reflect upon it, and think about then what. So next time you get that temptation, I really want you to think and visualize, what's the end game here if I keep going with this? And I think that will really help uh, get one foot out of the door as you're getting this temptation. So we're going to go to the next part of this. So you have then what? Now we have so what. So what is really about reducing the power of the temptation. So really the first step, then what, is about being aware of it. So what is really focused on reducing the power of that temptation. So for an example, when I felt that urge rising, I had to actively recognize the feelings that accompanied it. Instead of suppressing those feelings, I acknowledge them. And what I'd say to myself would be, hey, I feel tempted right now. And that's okay. Like I need to embrace it. I need to embrace this temptation and understand, why am I letting this in? Right? Why am I feeling tempted to go back to these old habits? And it's a little similar to what we are talking about. And then what? It's, as you're acknowledging it, you then have to accept whatever it is. You have to like actually live through it. What happens typically when we go to porn is we want to like reject whatever that feeling is. So like we want to reject, hey, if I'm feeling stressed, or I feel like I need relief, it's almost like, well, I don't want to face whatever that is that's giving me that stress, or that I need relief from, or potentially like if I'm like really tired, that's another one too that sometimes gets me. If I'm like really worn out, instead of just facing it and saying, hey, I just need to get some better sleep, have some better sleep habits. Instead, it's like, well, I feel really tired, so I'm going to go to this, to use porn, to get that relief of feeling tired. Like, it'll make me feel like awake again, kind of thing. And it's, instead of that, just say, so what? So what? I feel tired. Take away the power. Like, I don't have to, just because I feel tired, or just because I feel stressed, just because I feel anxious, or just because I feel like a little lonely. So what? That doesn't mean that I have to then go to porn to be that medication to solve that problem. It's really just like taking the power away from it. Like, I think if you were making a point to somebody and they just said, confidently, like, well, so what? I always feel like that response, in some ways, if the initial argument isn't really accurate, it's not true. Like, kind of like what we tell ourselves, like when we want to use porn, we want to go these bad habits. It's typically like a lie that we're telling ourselves that ends up not being true. When it's called out and we say, so what? It takes away a lot of that power. So once you recognize what that temptation is, and once you can call it out and say, well, so what? that can help really reduce the power of the temptation, and it can put power back into your hands to where you get like your autonomy back, basically. You get your autonomy back and you say, yeah, like I am stressed. I have a lot on my plate, but so what? That doesn't mean that I have to like make it worse by going back to this bad habit. So one technique that I wanted to share with you that I think is pretty interesting, pretty helpful. Uh, it's called the 5 4 3 2 1 technique. So basically, how it goes is you start at five. So you want to identify five things that you can see. And this is like when you're in the heat of the temptation, right? And this is like where a lot of ground can be gained. Because if you can make it out of these temptations uh, on on the side where you're still on the road to recovery, that really can build a lot of wins in your column that you can go back on. If you feel tempted again, that will help you even more build up that resiliency as you go through life. So you want to do 5 4 3 2 1. So first, identify five things that you can see. So maybe that's the plant in your room, the sunlight coming through the window, a squirrel running on the fence. I'm just looking outside right now. The sky, the clouds, trees, grass. Just start to focus on actual, real things, not your computer screen, not your fantasy in your head, not what's on your phone, but actually things that God has created, that things that are natural, things that you can really start that maybe have some emotion to them, that have a story that can tie you back into the real world. Number four. So first you want to do five things you can see, then find four things you can touch. So that could be the chair you're sitting in, a soft blanket, your hands. Get up, get outside for a second. This is really just focusing on what are like tangible things I can actually touch here. Because typically when we're tempted, right? Like for me, typically it's like if I'm on my phone screen or if I'm on my computer screen. And these are things I actually can't like touch. These are like, you basically want to like get away from touching yourself and go touch something that's inanimate or something that's natural, right? Touch some grass. I think that's something that people say a lot, right? Like go touch some grass. So you got five things you can see, four things you can touch. Next, listen for three things you can hear. So that could be birds chirping. That could be music that you're playing. That could just be the ambience of what's going on outside. You want to just focus on three things that you can hear. The wind whistling through the trees. Could be anything there, but focus on three things you can hear. So you got five things you can see, four things you can touch, three things that you can hear. Next, identify two things that you can smell. So perhaps a candle or coffee brewing, some tea, some food, whatever that smell is outside. Go smell something. Get yourself out of that trance of temptation and actually identify something you can smell. So you got five things you can see, four things you can touch, three things you can hear, two things you can smell, and lastly, find one thing that you can taste. So maybe the last remnants of your meal, a sip of water, some coffee, some tea like we were talking about. But like one thing you can taste. And that can really help you stay present and just remind you that the urge was just a fleeting thought, not a command. So really, again, this is the 5 4 3 2 1 technique. I think it's interesting. I think it's a good grounding exercise. I do a lot of yoga. Part of it reminds me of when you're meditating and just focusing on like your body and your breath, focusing on these things that are a part of us, that are a part of nature, versus this outside force that's drawing you into it, typically into your computer, into your laptop, into your fantasy mind. And these techniques, these grounding techniques, I think can help get you back in the present, get you back into like what's important, and get you away from that distraction. So hopefully that was helpful for you, the five 4-3-2-1 technique. And really getting back your power and saying, so what to this temptation? Like, does this temptation have power over me? Well, now it doesn't, because I was able to get myself back into the present and focus on things that are tangible in front of me. So, before we move on to the next step, just focus on reframing your thoughts when you're saying, so what? Instead of seeing temptation as a failure, see it as an opportunity to practice self-control. I think temptations are always going to be out there, right? It's never going to be like you can just live a life free of temptation, right? Even if when you look biblically, like Jesus was tempted, Jesus was tempted by Satan himself and promised all of these things. Even Jesus was tempted, right? Even like anyone, like temptation's always going to occur, right? There's always going to be temptations out there. But, bringing back the example of Jesus, it's making that autonomous decision to say, well, even though I'm tempted and I get tempted by these things, I still have the autonomy to say, so what? I have better things going on in my life. I have a different path that I'm going, and it's not your path. So, move on. Like, I'm not going to give into this. So what? There's no power actually behind what you're tempting me with. And I think that's something that's really important and something hopefully that you can take away from this step. Ask yourself, how can I learn from this moment? Each time you are resisting that temptation, you build resilience. So step 1 was, then what? Step 2 was, so what? And then the last step we have here is, now what? So this is the final step here. So now what is when you take action. So after gaining the awareness and reducing the temptation's power, what's your next move? Like, what are you going to do moving forward? So for an example, like on my end, when that temptation struck, one of the most helpful things for me, and I think I've talked about this on a few podcasts, is my accountability partner, my little brother. We intimately know each other very well before we started to be accountability partners, but after we decided to be accountability partners, and that's been now for, I think, almost 2 years now, we've got to know each other a lot better, which has been amazing as brothers. But one thing about knowing each other intimately is like we have a better understanding of maybe when the other person's struggling with temptations or is having more yellow days than green days, and where there are certain patterns that can be identified and that can be solved for. So a big thing that I did, and this is a big now what for me, was I was able to, be aware of like why I was being tempted and giving into it. I started to reduce the power of it. But I don't think it would have worked fully if I didn't actually put into action some tangible things. So things that I started to do more of was I amped up the frequency of my check-ins with my little brother. So typically we do once a day. At times I think I did 4 to 5 check-ins where they'd be throughout the day. Sometimes in the community we call them bookends, basically, is like where you'll put out like an expectation to say, hey, I'm going to check in with you before dinner or after dinner, after work, before work, when I wake up, when I go to bed. It's just putting bookends out there that you can tie like a specific time to your check-in. And following through on that's very powerful because you can really map out your day and put it out there through your words and commit to certain things. And that can really help, especially when you are aware of when those temptations are the strongest, when they're the most powerful. That can really help when you're taking action. You're saying, well, now what am I going to do? Well, now I'm going to map out my day. Now I'm going to check in with my accountability partner and then follow through with it. So really the now what is like the actions that you're going to take. So I definitely highly recommend having an accountability partner that you trust. I have some episodes called fast check-ins. Off the top of my head, I can't remember those ones, but I can put those in the show notes. But definitely having a fast check-in routine with an accountability partner is really helpful. But it's also just like getting yourself out of the situation. So, typically when I struggle, it's on my phone. So, and it's somewhere like where I'm isolated, right? So a big thing, right, is to get off my phone and to get outside somewhere public, like go work out. Something I've been doing lately has been doing yoga. Like can't bring your phone in the yoga studio, right? Like you're leaving that in the lobby. So it's really just taking steps to, like, once you recognize and you're aware of like where the temptation is, where the power lies, then it's taking actions to change your situation, to change your scenery, and that can really help out a ton. It can also just be like diving into a creative project. Like for me, writing, podcasting, those are things that are powerful. And as you go on through time and you start to realize like what healthy activities really help you, maybe start making a list of those things. And those can be go-to things if you feel tempted. You can go to those things that really help. One big thing for me is like audiobooks. I really enjoy those. Like an audiobook and like getting outside and going on a walk is really big for me because I still have that form of stimulation, like where I'm like reading a book basically as I'm walking, to where I'm not on my phone, but I'm still getting some kind of stimulation with my brain where I'm learning something or there's an interesting story. It's holding my attention and taking the attention away from what the temptation is. So it's really all about activities that make you feel fulfilled or connected. And that can really help lighten the load with the temptation and help you get it back on the right track. So, and another thing, ending this step here is it doesn't always have to be this giant, monumental, Herculean action that you have to take. Like I was saying before, it can just be something super simple, like just getting outside, getting a quick workout, just any small step. It's going to reinforce the commitment to change and help build that resilience over time when facing that temptation. So again, that final step is called now what? So to wrap things up, overcoming temptation and breaking free from the cycle of porn use is a journey that requires consistent effort and awareness. But by applying the 3 whats, then what, so what, and now what, you can create a path forward that's healthier and more fulfilling. I hope that my experience that I've shared with you today and that these steps resonate with you. And just remember, it's completely normal to struggle, especially when life gets overwhelming. What matters, though, is how you choose to respond. Yeah, if you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who might benefit. And until next time, remember that change is possible. You're not alone on the journey. And keep fighting a good fight. Talk to y'all later.